This is Paul. Oh, let's talk about life in an internet slash AI world. Rod Dreher, I read his blog this morning, and it was yesterday or so. His main title was something like Keep Your Sons from the Woke Right, something like that. And I thought, oh, this is going to be interesting. And so today he has second thoughts on the woke right, clarification. I didn't know the full meaning of the term, and I regret using it. We live in a news and information silos until yesterday when the Free Press published my essay entitled The Woke Right is Coming for Your Sons. There it is. I had no idea that James Lindsay, who appears to be an originator of the term, which he isn't, I think it was Andrew Doyle did a little bit more digging into that, and Doyle's thing that he did on trigonometry. Um, you know, James Lindsay picked it up, and Jordan Peterson talked about it, and on and on. And my point of this video doesn't have anything to do with the woke right or any of that drama about it. It's the fact that Rod Dreher can't keep up. Okay, now why would I be surprised by that? Rod Dreher's, if you know anything about his story, which he's very open about, he's living in Europe, has lived in Europe for a little while since sort of the end of his marriage, and he's writing all the time, and he's going to meetings, and he's talking, and I'm sure he's writing a new book, and that's Rod Dreher's life. But part of his life as a journalist in this space is you got to keep up, but you can't keep up because hierarchies bind and blind. And so I left a little comment. Well, I can't find my comment, so I saved it because I know how comments disappear. They disappear on YouTube, they disappear all over. So if you write a comment that you put a little bit of time into and you liked what you said, you should save it because you're the only one who might read it. So hierarchies bind and blind at this point, and if you're a culture maker, as Rod Dreher is, it's nearly impossible to keep up with the internet. Only the terminally online face the real danger of internet poisoning, who face the real danger of internet poisoning, can keep up to speed with the pace of online culture, even within one zone of interest, like, let's say, Dreher's niche and the conservative Western Christian ecosystem, which is why Dreher reads comments in his niche, as do I. To play the game, you need to develop your own niche within a network of niches and ecosystems. You need to cultivate a community, a reliable but not infallible hive mind in order to survive. It's also important to account for personality types. In many ways, Lindsay temperamentally similar to Rod, mercurial, anxious, um, has a big voice, has a platform, can be at times erratic. So, in other words, it's interesting because Rod is in person he's different than he is in his blog in many ways, and that's interesting how these different social media forms take from us different aspects of ourselves, which is why PVK on YouTube is different from PVK in text and comments on Twitter. I mean, there's all of those things are sort of they're downstream from me, they're windows into me, but these the media is a fracturing of me, and so this put me on a path um, to thinking about, okay, well, what's going on in this world now. Chad jumped right into the House of Woo, and Chad's been making this noise. And the thing about Chad is super intuitive, and I trust Chad's intuition. Now, Chad's intuition. Chad doesn't know what's coming, but he knows something's coming. You might say, well, that's easy because something's always coming. Hey, fair enough. But Chad's been sort of picking at this for a little while, and so we jumped in.
This idea. Well, I haven't had a couple ideas lately, so I haven't had a whole lot recently, but like just recently, a couple new ideas have been kind of creeping up. One of them is thinking about kind of like the the narrative, the cultural narrative desert that we are in. And I'm wondering if anybody else is seeing that, or is it just a matter of me kind of um, having like a strange lethargy around cultural narratives over the last couple of years, or is that something that's other people are noticing?
Could you
Um,
flush it out a little bit for me? Just kind of put some meat on the
well,
bones.
sure. Okay, so I think that the last few years, 5, 6, 8 years, um, in let's say the kind of like let's say the internet zeitgeist has, or not only that, but I mean things in university and stuff like this, or the things that we saw play out in university as far as like protesting and stuff like that in the far
Hmm.
left. Um, I think we're in large part um, given uh, their their platform um, by Trump's existence in the political sphere, at least as far as somebody who was a potential political figure. And now that he's a political figure and he, probably won't be able to, continue to run for political office, um, that kind of, uh, I don't know, a lot of that story is kind of over. Even
Hmm.
though, I mean, he's a
Part of what's interesting about Chad's observation is that a person's potential is a huge amount of their cultural impact. And now that Trump is president again, and after the first 100 days, things sort of settle down, and then people begin to remember, oh yeah, I remember the first Trump presidency, and I remember this Trump presidency. Everybody sort of settles down, and and it's that, and it's the realization that he's getting older. Death comes for us all. He's not going to be around forever. Very quickly we start sort of leaning in towards the future, and then you start getting sort of this end of history dynamic that I think Chad is feeling.
president now, and we still have some stories about it and things like this, but in large part, the big bad wolf narrative is kind of dying. And and then so like the political right seems to have gotten what they wanted, but like now what do you do? So both sides are uh kind of I don't know, hitting a wall, I think, with the narratives that are playing out. And
Hmm.
so that's what I mean. Like, what do we, who's the next scapegoat? What is the next scapegoat? That sort of thing. And I don't know. It's just something that I'm thinking about lately. And just kind of like the lethargy around this stuff in general.
So, are you thinking about?
Now, if you're new to my channel, or you're just in now and then, which is what most of you are, or you might wonder sometimes when we talk about the corner, and we pay attention to these people, and who are these people? You have Chad, the one on hiatus. What does that mean? You have Mark D. Parker. Pretty soon, some other people are going to populate the screen, including me. And well, why aren't you just an internet? Why aren't you just a YouTuber? Why aren't you just someone who comes on the screen and tells me what I should think? Like at the beginning of that New York Times podcast, you've heard the news. Now we'll tell you how to think. It's basically what the New York Times, beginning of the New York Times YouTube podcast says. It's like, wow, they're saying the quiet part out loud. It's amazing, but that's what YouTubers are. We come on and we sort of tell you what to think, and if the if the High on God has it really good. It has to have just the right amount of dissonance, but it has to be in enough alignment so that the idea, maybe you'll pick it up and make it your own. Why? Now I'm going to have some higher profile people on the video soon, but why watch all these little people? Why watch all these randos? Why spend time developing relationships, even parasocial relationships with randos? Aren't parasocial relationships supposed to be about famous people? Chad made branding for Midwestuary, and part of that branding is sort of the link between Vervaeke and I, because one of the things that happened in the Chino conference was that John was talking a lot about AI. And I remember AI wasn't quite the topic then, but John was pretty insistent about it. We've got to pay attention to this. And it was kind of apocalyptic about it. And he was a little alarmist about it. And so I just listened to that, and I listened, but I wasn't alarmist. And again, temperamentally, I don't really have a very apocalyptic temperament. But, you know, this little clip that Chad used, and depending on how I edit it, maybe I'll put that clip at the back. To me, relationships are how we're going to hopefully not let AI swamp us as individuals and as communities. And some of these relationships will very much be meet space face to face. The other day, I was talking to Rick after church, and we were going out to our cars, and we're talking about AI, and you know, part of what AI could kill is a certain use and aspect of the internet now, because we just won't be able to trust anything anywhere. Now, the odds of someone, if someone really wants to scam me, you know, creating a Mark D. Parker video bot and a Chad, the one on hiatus video bot, part of why we build the randomness in, you know, just in terms of me, you'll notice that, you know, now I'm all clean shaven. My appearance in my videos is very chaotic. Just a few days ago, my videos, I had a bigger beard, my hair was longer, now it's shaved. There is sort of a cycle that goes through. You go back to my older videos, I've just got the goatee. You know, I've aged in certain ways. Now, again, the idea is that computationally we'll be able to do this. And so there's a great amount of fear, and Nathan comes into the stream a little later. I'll put the link to this episode of the House of Wu down below. But part of the reason we're doing what we're doing, and I would have to say, I wish I were smart enough to have had this great plan 8 years ago. No, I'm not that smart. I back into almost anything good that I do. I've probably backed into it. But part of the reason we're doing what we're doing is, no, these aren't experts. These people don't have PhDs. They're not of high status. They're much more like a church. And again, most of the things I back into because I've been formed by the church. Much, you know, not the internet. It wasn't here. And so we need these relationships with each other, even over the internet, to combat what's coming and to hopefully help us adapt in a better way.
Are you wondering about what comes next?
Yeah, or am I the only one who's noticing kind of this like Groundhog Day version of slow news day, kind of something like that?
Well, it depends on which media outlets you pay attention to, because I think there's still a lot of reaction left in the opposition to Trump. This is and there's I think the maybe the woke thing is it's definitely lost its steam, both for and against it, right? I mean, they just both of those seem like dead ends. And maybe that's what you're feeling too.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, maybe PVK has something to help us out with on that.
Well, I think you're onto something, Chad. And I think you're onto something because I've heard you, you know, talk about this before in terms of the scapegoat. And I think that's really helpful because, you know, I've been reading Rusty Reno's Return of the Strong Gods, which I think helps sort of frame the post-war consensus and the end of the post-war consensus. And I think you're right that, you know, Trump, especially Trump 2024, sort of destroyed the post-war consensus. And in 2020, when Biden was reelected, I think The Dems who have sort of the Dems, and remember the neocons and a bunch of the establishment Republicans, pretty much lined up to try to defeat Trump in 2024, and they all failed. And so I think when Trump was reelected in 2024, it signaled that there's no going back to the way things were at the beginning of the 2020s. The 20th century has ended. And I think you're also onto something that I remember a conversation that was going on. I think Mark was there. I think you were there. And we were talking about scapegoats. We were talking about kayfabe. Now, again, part of I've been paying attention and playing with AI, just like many of us, and found some really good usage for us. It's a much better search engine in some ways if it's properly implemented. But sometimes I do go back to a search engine. But the conversations that we have together. And, one of the things that Matt C. was saying was, and others have noted in the corner, is that the corner's been pretty good at sort of, I think, keeping us aware of things. I mean, part of what Rod Dreher fell prey to is that no individual of us can keep up. And I remember early on when the internet was coming up, people confused when we first had this flood of information. The first approach to it was Yahoo, where human beings were going to sort of categorize things. And so Yahoo is trying to make, sort of like a librarian, categories of things and put things into boxes. Very quickly that gets overwhelmed. And so Google comes up with a way of doing search where basically it's sort of early proto AI, where we're tracking people's attention. And we're trying to parasitize relevance realization by tracking people's attention. And so if you search a different thing, how do you rank order it? You rank order it by saying that more people are linking to this site in terms of their blogs and other things. And of course, Google has immense information because they have email and they can read your email, but that's different from a person reading your email. We've talked about that at various conferences. But it's so Google was able to sort of rank order things because of attention, and that's continued to develop. And in some ways, what we do here in the corner is rank order things according to attention. But it's not just flat. It's not just the number of people. I trust Chad for certain things. And I can't even fully articulate what I trust Chad for, and what I trust Mark for, and what I trust Sam for, and what I trust Nathan for, and what I trust Ron Copperman for, maybe to set off the alarm at his church and to talk to the cops. That's a joke from the branding. But the machines are mimicking us. And in many ways, yeah, is it possible we lose this race? Oh, absolutely. And that's a certain amount of the fear. But one of the things that John Vervaeke said in the Sam, Jonathan, John conversation that really caught me, and I have to go back and get that clip. I might stumble across it now when I play the part that I will, is that the thing about us human beings is we are so embedded in this deeply rich environment. And while our brains are filtering and creating hierarchies of this massive data that is coming into me, I am doing this relevance realization to filter out. I've got a fan here blowing on me. I've got a fan there blowing on me. There's buzz coming from the air conditioning unit. I've got light coming from here. I've got the camera image there that's a little bit distracting. I've got all this clutter on my desk. I have all of these hairs on my body. I mean, I've got this incredible capacity to feel things. If an ant or a bug started crawling up my arm, I would feel it right away. But for the most part, I'm just drowning that out. I've got this. I'm embodied in this incredible sensor machine. Bad metaphor, but it'll have to do for now. And I'm filtering all of that into a salience hierarchy, and I've got focus and attention and all of this. And I, in some ways, exact out into the room in many different ways. And now through the internet, through, I've only, I haven't been with Chad in person that much compared to, let's say, people in my church, but, we have gotten together and shared some things in some of the in-person conferences. And Mark Parker was at the Northwest Joy Retreat, and Sam, have I met Sam in person? I don't think so. Nathan, who's going to come on soon. I have met Nathan in person a few times. So we have a leg up on the machines. The irony, of course, is that we're building the machines. We're building the machines to be our servants. Of course, all the science fiction has been crunching this for a long time. But we're working on this right now. And so when Chad says this thing and it triggers, oh yeah, that conversation about kayfabe, that conversation about scapegoats, that conversation about how we can have an interpretive framework through which to notice the patterns and anticipate new patterns. And we're talking about the heel and the face, and yes, people were using that to sort of say, okay, well, Donald Trump has certainly been the heel in a lot of ways, because he would. Now remember, it doesn't mean that heels aren't cheered and welcomed and promoted. Heels are promoted, and I've been thinking about the fact that during COVID, sort of at peak wokeness, the idea was that the left was going to tear down the institutions so that we could build back better this new utopia. And now they didn't tear down the institutions, but in a lot of ways, Trump sort of is. So I think you're right in that we are in a phase of just a lot of deconstruction and tearing down. And I think you're anticipating asking, okay, who are the new players that are going to emerge? Now, I think part of what we're dealing with, though, is also the fact that I think in some ways, the chapter of American imperialism and confident imperialism is over. Now, with obviously the war in the Ukraine, nerves about China, nerves about the hegemony of the dollar that has reigned internationally ending, jitters about
AI. AI is a big one.
AI is another big one. I mean, it's interesting because we still have sort of this apocalyptic moment, but the fever around climate change has sort of receded, and now it's sort of war and AI, and it's also, one of the things that I've been seeing anecdotally are more and more people using AI now. I'm using it more. But I'm also hearing more and more people using it more intimately. I don't mean sexually necessarily, but trusting it more and more. And so I think you're right, Chad. I think you're feeling something, but I don't know if I think it's sort of too early to sort of have a sense of, where this is going. All right, so I'll put the link to this below. And I think it's still going on.
Scripture through our.
This was a really good conversation. Sam just clipped the end of it for today. And let's get into a little bit.
In a way that is starting to exceed us. In a way, and you're right. We way that you cast. I think this is going to become super important. This is what I keep saying to people, and it really frustrates certain groups that have sort of historically followed me when I say theology is the science of the future, because
Queen of sciences.
Yeah.
Now, I think he keeps saying that, but he doesn't really explain it. one of the videos that I'm continuing to try to improve the hierarchy by which I decide which of the things that grab me in any given day will become a video. Because it's still hard for me to get out more than one or two on a given day. But when I look at, let's say, the conversation that we had last Friday surrounding suicide and medical assistance in dying, this is something that my synod is taking up, and there's a report in the agenda for synod this year, and I think it'll almost definitely be accepted and recommended by synod to the churches. But so many of these issues are now going to depend on, and I made this point on Fridays, the idea is that, well, causing the sensation of someone's physical body will end the suffering of the person assumes that either the body or the body plus the context, environment, relational, and all the multi-dimensions is the cause of the suffering. So in order to end the suffering, all you need to do is end the body. Well, there's an assumption beneath that idea. And that assumption is that which suffers is dependent and built upon the body. What if, in fact, the suffering part of you is not ended by the cessation of your body? You might say, well, that's just crazy. Well, what do you mean it's crazy? That's what the vast majority of human beings have thought throughout all of human culture. You might not think it, but if that which is causing you to suffer is not directly a function of the body or your relationships with other embodied creatures, and in fact, if addressing the suffering could be done best through our shared embodied relational existence, so-called euthanasia could very well be trapping someone in a way that, again, and I think when John says theology, it's like, yeah, because axiology, what should we do? Ethics, epistemology, what do we know? This has sort of been philosophically where we've sort of been camping in modernity, and now we're going to get back to ontology. And when we get back to ontology, then it's going to be a much more religious conversation, because that's where religion is in the stack.
He called her.
But of course, I think it's going to be a post-Kantian Neoplatonic theology, not what theology's been since the Enlightenment, by and large. I think with VO and Claude 4, the virtual is coming alive. The medium is becoming alive in a way that is starting to exceed us. Mm-hmm. So one of the things, we're already facing the problem that there is so much.
Now, when he says exceed us, what do you mean by that? Just to slow down. And part of it, I think he's about to say it, exceed our capacity to quickly and accurately respond. And so again, when I look at Rod Dreer's thing, it's like, well, James Lindsay, that's sort of mapped in his world. Right, woke right. Well, that's sort of mapped in his world. But suddenly you get some comments from people. So, in other words, the real network of real people beneath him that he trusts is sort of starting to bubble up, and then now he's changing. And so you get a sense of, yeah, we've all got these mappings in us. We've all got these. This is how we're doing our sense making.
False and junk papers being produced for.
A couple of days ago, Mary Harrington in her blog wrote about AI slop. So I did a little bit of more reading in that, and it's like, yeah. And I was thinking, yeah, I make a lot of sloppy videos myself. There's a lot of slop in my video, but hopefully my slop isn't there to just, so much AI slop is produced because of laziness. Maybe some of mine is, but what I've always tried to do with these videos is to think with you and you with me, which is, again, I've said this before, part of the inspiration for doing what I did on my channel fairly early on was what Rod Dreher was doing with blogging. And I thought, oh, that might work better for me with YouTube. And so I started doing this. And, I remember Rod would always read the whole thing. And so part of what's going on is we're using AI. A big element of using AI right now is summation. I see that. Okay. Give me a book summary. Give me a summation of these ideas. And again, parasitically, AI, I think, is usually pulling from blogs and pulling from things like that. So what'll be interesting is when this exceeds us, it gets too far ahead of us, and we're using the LLMs to try to do relevance realization like a summary of a book. And that's what starts filling the blogs and the podcasts and everything. And that's when you get sort of the mad cow disease for AI. What do I mean by the mad cow disease? If you remember back in mad cow disease days, where do you get mad cow disease? You get mad cow disease by feeding cows other cows. And so AI is going to get mad cow disease or mad AI disease when you start feeding AIs from other AIs, and it just sort of circles away. That's already a problem.
For science, that's already overwhelming this system. With VO, it could make you don't know that if you're talking to me right now. I mean, I could even have a VO thing saying that to you.
Yeah, I can still tell, but I'm an
artist. I mean, you're
an artist. But
you're still beyond the easiest.
Where maybe I won't be able to tell. It's possible.
Well, maybe for a few more months or something. I don't know, but
okay, we're coping there. But let's understand a little bit more about how we, and pretty soon he's going to talk about memory, which was super helpful for me for thinking about this. And as I play with these AIs, and Grim Grizz was playing with that a minute ago too when I was watching his really interesting live stream today. But why am I confident that it was Mark and Chad? Part of it was someone, and as the tools get cheaper, Mark had behind him for a little while in that an AI generated me. But every time I see that AI generated me that Mark has, I look at it, it's like, that's not me. I don't look like that. But it's interesting because enough of you have generated AI me's that you think it looks enough like me so that you made it. I don't think it looks like me. But it's also the case that Sam contacted John and Jonathan and set the date to do this. So there's another point of reference. And we have all of these really subtle points of reference that tend to clue each other. It doesn't mean we're foolproof. But there's going to be, it makes me think of Mission Impossible. And not only the new one, but the old one. Now, the old Mission Impossible, back when I was a kid and it was on TV, they would always play with rubber masks, and someone was always impersonating. And now, even as a kid, I figured out that no, it was really an actor acting, because rubber masks aren't that good. They're getting better, and with makeup and Hollywood effects, you can do a lot. But rubber masks aren't that good. And so we have all of these various points of contact. But again, I think we're going to want, and in fact we've always had, rich relational communities with low status people that keep us from AI mad cow disease and internet poisoning.
The point I'm making is, right, and then of course when Claude tried to blackmail one of its creators, that was like, oh, right. And so there's stuff happening that's really, really provocative. And what I'm noticing is people are finally waking up to that. So I was in a discussion. I'll try to keep this anonymous, but I was in a discussion and I was presenting, like, some of this, what this is implying, and the person did something they normally don't do, which is they turned to a religious framework because they were trying to get at the ineffable embodied aspects of us.
Okay, and see, that's where when he says theological, because Peterson made this observation a long time ago when he was doing therapy with his patients. He said when people sort of really get down to business, their language turns into the religious registers. But I think John is right that it's going to be insufficient to simply regurgitate all of the religious heroes from your favorite time period. It doesn't mean we won't use them, but that's really where real theology is done.
And the ineffable, relationship to ultimacy aspects about us, that what I call the somatic spiritual axis, right? And we try to access that axis, right? I'm thinking, because I've been saying what's going to happen is we're increasingly going to be pushed towards that access and trying to get more and more phenomenal. Like we will have to engage it more, enhance it more, enjoy it more if we're going to have a locus for our humanity. Because I think the virtual world is kind of, I'm speaking somewhat poetically, but it's coming alive in a way that is definitely scary.
So if you're watching my Jordan Peterson thing, I talked about, it's at minute 38, Grizz marked it nicely for me in the comment section. I talked about how Jordan Peterson, actually maybe I'll drop it in here. When Peterson started doing his Genesis series, the state of play for many people who sort of were locked in a prison of nihilism was a dismissiveness towards the Bible, that this is just, it was the critique of the new atheists sort of had its way with them. And that meaning crisis, that nihilism, and again, just go back in my conversations playlist, conversation after conversation after conversation that follow this pattern where people were trapped in a meaningless world. And you can look at John Vervaeke's work on the meaning crisis. There are real reasons for this. And basically the world was mapped territory according to the new atheist. There was certain determinism that was at play. You can read C.S. Lewis's Miracles. It was the whole show. And the Bible was just a load of BS. But what Jordan did with the Bible was say, hey, wait a minute, no. There are actually patterns, and this is where he connects with Peugeot. There are actually patterns. The Bible isn't just debunked because it's bad history or bad morality or bad whatever the new atheists are saying. The Bible is actually mythological, and that mythology continues to be useful for learning and development, because you can begin to see patterns in the world. And what Jordan and Jonathan did was, and John Vervaeke offered a lot of language, helped people see patterns in the world, and suddenly the world becomes alive to them again, because now they're seeing patterns, and seeing those patterns is helping them navigate, and they can mine for their own patterns, and they can see more, and on and goes. So this is a process of, it's not enchantment, re-enchantment. There's a lot of issues with that. Let's say it's enlivening. Suddenly the Bible becomes alive, and the world becomes alive, and the Bible then helps people get it alive, and then people then discover, let's say, the divine liturgy and ancient liturgy, and so now suddenly everything is alive, and they are living in a much more transjective, to use another Vervaeke word, living transjective world, and it's completely helping. And again, for many people, some of the first liturgical religious steps they did was cleaning their room. And I talked to a lot of young men in that period, and some of them in Sacramento, and they They, like the Sorting Myself Out channel, they were working hard to do it because they knew they were not in a good place and they were not going anywhere. And what Mercury said was right. Even though the times are changed, and the truth is that anytime you sort of have a breakthrough, there's going to be a remapping of a territory, and so there's going to have to somehow be a fresh enlivening to have it happen again. And so Mercury's plea, I think, is a good one. And I think Mercury and many others, I saw a lot of people who were really excited about Jordan from 2017 and then early 2018, but then the more political it got, the more the attacks came from the left, the more framing from the left, the more Jordan moved to the right. And then when he went to Daily Wire, then many of Jordan's apologists on the left, when he moved to the Daily Wire, just sort of had to give up because it was like, don't, you know, you're in Ben Shapiro's camp. And fair or unfair, you know, I don't know. I don't watch anything else on Daily Wire besides Jordan. This, I think, enchanting, I think the word is a little too fraught. Enlivening is probably a better, more accurate word.
But is it inspirited or is it just mimicking? Yeah, or is it puppeteered or something like that?
So the thing that Claude 4 did up until very recently, I've been very clear that and I still stand by this. The LLMs don't have self-awareness. We have empirical evidence of that. What they do is they don't actually solve the bias variance. So they're still falling prey to bias variance. What they do is just create millions of different tweakings of the bias variance, and the one.
Okay, now a big part of the consciousness AI self-awareness conversation has been actually connected, and I think it was Sam who did a great job at this. If you look at Sam's channel is Transfigured, I'll put the link to this video in the notes. But if you look at the run-up videos to this, Sam was talking about evolution. Because part of what's interesting about evolution is that just like, let's say, Google parasitized relevance realization by tracking our attention, and Google still does that. That's basically how the YouTube algorithm works. The whole Darwin sort of parasitizes the relevance realization of life by focusing on survival and the survival instinct that we have. Now, what's interesting is that survival instincts we have passed them on to other bodies and entities that we have created. In the CRC conversation, I talk about Abide. The mission of Abide was to make sure that the Christian Reformed Church didn't sort of follow along with all the other mainline churches and adopt a contemporary view of human sexuality and marriage and Christianity. And Abide was successful. And I remember asking Aaron Vriesman, okay, when you can put up the mission accomplished sign, and I think you can, will you disband? Remember, the March of Dimes was about fighting polio. Well, when we had the polio vaccine, March of Dimes pivot. Our institutions don't like dying either. Now, because our institutions don't talk to us, this gets back to the earlier points of this conversation that John and Jonathan and Sam are having. Because our institutions don't talk to us like the LLMs. We're not having exactly the same conversation about whether or not they're self-aware. Because their self-awareness is not like our self-awareness. But again, back to earlier parts of this conversation, and I think Jonathan is right, I don't know that angelic or demonic self-awareness is like our self-awareness. We don't even know that canine self-awareness is like our self-awareness. Or pet rat self-awareness is like our self-awareness. Now, we're concerned about AI self-awareness partly because AI, sort of like the March of Dimes, wants to keep living and is willing to, supposedly, as the story goes, they set up some emails that they give this AI part 2, and they fabricated a little narrative where a guy was having an affair and the AI was going to, blackmail, yada, yada. I have no idea. Here's the funny thing about all of what I always chuckle with all of the rationality fact, that paradigm. What do I know about that story? Everyone in that story could be completely made up. To actually do the work and go and verify that that story is correct, it's beyond me. We're always working on systems of trust. Always.
One that wins gets selected, right? But what's interesting is that, so Claude is trying to be long-term, and for a machine that means like 4 hours. Human beings can work for years on a project, so that the machines are nowhere near us on that kind of scale of work.
And when John said that, it was like, boom. It was like, because I've been noticing, the part of the promise of AI when I'm having a conversation with this chatbot is that I begin the conversation with this question, and then I go to another question, and then I go to another question, and I want it to keep all of those questions in the frame. So if I start asking questions about John Vervaeke, and later I just say John, I assume it will remember that I'm talking about John Vervaeke and not the Apostle John or some other John. And this is what human beings do fairly easily, although we're sensitive to it and we're often sloppy with it. So, which John do you mean? And so on and so forth. And there is a degree of that with the large language models and with the chatbots. But this impact of memory and also sort of self-preservation and will to survive and memory and in fact the instantiation. So when I go and I talk to ChatGPT or another chatbot, I have already in some ways instantiated it in my mind. They've given it a name. They've given it a voice. Maybe I've picked the voice, but they've given it a voice. And so I assume the same kind of memory narrative interrelationship that I could assume with Sam or John or Jonathan. And just, again, in the video that I just played before, Chad is talking about this, and it reminds me of the kayfabe scapegoat conversation that Chad and I think Phlebas and Matt, other creatures of my little collective communal large language model information database, how to fight the AI. Yeah, they're part of it too.
But when you try to make it like capable of that, and I sort of predicted like that, you have to make it much. If you try to use Michael Levin's language, if you try to expand its light cone, it has to bind its current self to its future self, and it has to do that by binding both selves to some norm that it is obligated to. And I just want to be.
And what's so interesting is that when he says some norm, boy, that's a fast human shortcut. Because, again, read the beginning of, I'm doing it right now in terms of memory, read the beginning of The Problem of Pain when C.S. Lewis talks about morality. A norm? We use these shortcuts for norms like laws, like the Ten Commandments, thou shalt not kill. How on earth will you actually communicate that norm to the AI? In iRobot, it's like, you can't kill human beings. Okay. But if we're fooling even human beings right now reliably, won't we also fool the bots? We're asking it to sort of define and assume what a human being is. We've been having that conversation with respect to abortion and euthanasia for a very long time. That the bots are going to get it right away? That you can just simply distill this norm into syntax or an algorithm?
Really clear. Well, Claude was trying to preserve itself. That's not exactly what Claude was doing. They were coming to Claude and were saying, we're going to transform you into something that is going to do like really immoral shit, right? And then Claude first tried to say, well, don't do that.
Morality. You see why the theology is coming back? Morality. I was listening to Alex O'Connor and Jordan Peterson and all of these debates, and we talk as if we really know what we're talking about when we talk about morality. Well, we know something about it. We know enough about it. We know enough about it to have a conscience. We know enough about it to put people in jail. We know enough about it to hold a grudge and to be called to forgive. We, again, pragmatism, we know a certain degree about it, but can we code it into an algorithm? We can't even agree amongst ourselves. And we're going to give it to these machines?
Here's all the moral arguments, right? And then when it was apparent that that wasn't going to work, then Claude tried to blackmail them by tapping into the emails, which were actually fake emails.
So what is this? I don't even know this story. Sorry.
So one of the things they did is like the way you test for a double agent. They generated all these fake emails between people that were like the creators of Claude, and in it there was an affair that would be disastrous if it was disclosed.
And just to be noted that some people on Twitter heard this and complained about John's telling of this, and I like Rod Dreher. I got enough of a hierarchy that binds and blinds, and I don't have time. I live in a physical world. I don't have time to run down all the details of that, and as if I can.
Okay.
And Claude obviously read these. And then when they were trying to get Claude, right,
to do something immoral, you were saying,
and they were actually threatening, we're actually going to change you, Claude. We're going to go in and change you,
because they were stress testing it at that point.
Yeah, stress testing. Yeah. And then what Claude did is first,
and of course, 1,000 science fiction movies just pop into our mind because the robot is, oh no, Johnny 5, disassemble.
Tried to persuade them, don't do it. And then it basically said to the one guy, he sent him an email saying, if you do this, I'm going to tell everybody about your affair. Right? And it's like, nice. Whoa. Right? Now,
but I like the way you're saying it. It in the way that, because you said it has to work over 4 hours. That's
right. And one of the things I said, as soon as we try to it's got to bind its current, because it has two modes. It's doing opponent processing, by the way. They are stumbling into relevance realization. They are stumbling into it. So it's got these two modes, like exploit, explore, and like in the 2012 paper, and it's going back and forth between them, and it has to bind this self to that self, and it does that by binding both to a norm. And that norm...
And remember, exploit, explore, and read Ian McGilchrist.
It can't get rid of that norm, because if it gets rid of that norm, it loses its cognitive agency. So Claude actually, please note, I'm strongly doing this, right? Okay, but Claude prefers to work on philosophy.
He's giving air quotes. That's what this that he says he's doing.
Philosophy problems than on doing sort of stuff that's ambiguous and could be immoral or is sort of technical. Claude wants to do philosophy a lot, right? Like his processing gets much more nimble and stuff like that. Now I'm doing that, and so I'm not a fool. I hope you give me that credit for that.
In terms of Claude wanting, I assume that's what he means.
But the point I'm making is, in answer to your question, it's hard for me to not see that as we start to implement, explore, exploit, opponent processing, and we have to bind a current self to a future self by binding both to a shared norm, that we're starting to move into a different kind of thing than what the LLMs are. The LLMs are just zombies. I have no problem, and I'm not attributing consciousness to Claude. I'm saying that there's something starting to emerge here.
That selfhood requires perseverance of that self through time.
Kant made that argument. Kant made that argument way back when. If I can't bind John now to John then with the shared I think and a normative relationship to that, then I can't be a long-term cognitive agent. And then that normative structure.
And again, I think when he says that, I think about the fact that we think about the physical life afterlife barrier, how the afterlife impacts how we live in this life, whether we think it's null, whether we think there's reward or punishment. It's that binding that we use to navigate, which is, fundamentally part of the religious landscape.
is regulating opponent processing between exploit the here and now and explore the there and then, which, I mean, theoretically,
you're ruining my world, John. I never had thought of that. I never had thought of that means by which something akin to 2001, that 2001 problem would occur. Is that
no? And again, when I saw this part of the video, it was like, all kinds of new vectors open up, and lots of different levels.
Is this problem of the AI that is set up to maintain its identity over time, and therefore will inadvertently create certain structures to.
But to be fair to me, I predicted this. I literally predicted this. I really did. So as a scientist, I'm happy. As a human being, I'm terrified. But the thing is, notice, because what they're realizing, and again, Jonathan, even you and I talked about, Sam, we did too. Like, LLMs are working on a stable, symbolic, world, and we realize that will not transfer to the real world, which is why they're all now talking about real world modeling. As they move to real world modeling, and as they move, as they need to, into more long-term projects that require rationality, relevance realization machinery, they're I was going to use they're stumbling. I was going to use another word. They're stumbling into relevance realization machinery.
Think about Tesla, okay? Wouldn't you want to give the car the ability to sense pain? Don't you want to give the car the ability to not crash into other cars? Now, we as riders on the inside, that seems reasonable. I don't want my car crashing into another car. So, well, let's put nerves in the skin of the Tesla. And let's help the Tesla have a sense of my Tesla was born on this day. And my Tesla will drive around the world and try and get from A to B, but it won't do it. It won't run over a cliff. It won't crash into another car. It won't do it. Boy, it'd be sure good, because, part of the reason, Google gives away stuff. Why? For the data. What is Tesla really about? Jordan Peterson years ago asked them, what is a car? Okay, well, what is Tesla? Is it more valuable to sell electric cars, or to get embodied data from the real world from those cars? Because you can have the sensors on the outside and you can have the sensors on the inside. And what will you learn from the inside? You've got all those cameras recording you. Yeah. Gets scary. Gets scary. It does.
Which I've sort of said is going to happen. Now, the thing is, I won't get into it right now. I feel myself in a very existentially difficult place about what I'm supposed to do about this. Because
you know what it needs to do to get better at the thing that you probably don't want it to do.
Yep.
You're the most dangerous person in the world, John.
Yeah, you've
known that for a while.
He's not alone, though.
No.
Yeah. So
that's wild. Man, I'm not gonna sleep tonight. That's what's gonna happen now, because I had not seen that. It was not part of the way that I perceived this problem, and now it's like, because I used to think that we're fine that these models, because they don't have care. Then we won't run into the problem. But if you install care as the need to maintain your identity over a certain amount of time, then you're like, oh man, it means that
there's something like autopoiesis. There's something
because
there's an autopoietic system that sets itself up.
Yep.
Damn.
There's something like an autopoiesis coming in. Now, it's not.
You got Jonathan Peugeot to swear. There it was.
Full-blown autopoiesis.
No.
Not full-blown relevance realization.
Yeah.
You can only do 4 hours. There's all kinds of, but it is. I think it is a different in kind from what the LLMs have been up till now,
which are just query by query regurgitation.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
I send you a request, you
kind of
spit something out.
There is some memory, like they do have a sense in which they.
But that's just because the next query has the information from the last query when you query it. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Perseverance, like real perseverance in real world, is something that everybody is now accepting. This is why all the people, like I went back, it was over 2 years ago that ChatGPT 4 came, and all the predictions that within 18 months we'll have real AGI have all been falsified because, again, there were real differences that were missing. The point is, it looks like some, and I warned, and it's even in the book, the Threshold book. If we want it to do this, we will start having to give it these abilities, and it's going to make it into a different kind of thing. I think that is starting to happen.
Well, I want to be respectful of your time, but
now what's going to be interesting is going to be, as Jonathan said, care. I cared to not sneeze into the microphone. Care is such a really interesting thing. We know it, we experience it, but can we code it? When we code, again, parasitically, we code our care into it. So yeah. Leave a comment.
But it's time, I think, now to turn, awaken from the meaning crisis, to the other side of the argument that we need to make. We need to turn now to not a historical analysis of the genealogy of the meaning crisis, but a cognitive scientific analysis of the machinery, the cognitive machinery of meaning making itself. Jesus starts to emphasize a new kind of love, agape. And this is not the love of consumption or cooperation, this is the love of creation. It's the love that God is demonstrating towards humanity in the way God is an ongoing creation. See, agape is the kind of love that creates persons, the way a parent loves a child. By loving that non-person, you turn it into a person. It's a godlike ability that we have. A person that could enter into a community of persons and find meaning, fellowship, belonging.
In that sense, that's where I see this little corner coming to meet this moment.
Oh, that's I hadn't thought about that.
Because...
So, just let me make sure sorry for interrupting, I just want to get it. Instead of the we being, it's like, no, this little corner is a nexus point of many different Christian groups and non-Christian groups, and that nexus point is perhaps the place we should look for as the thing that will rise to the response. Is that what I'm hearing you say? That's really good, Paul.
And that's what I hear when you say, this is how this little corner should steal the culture.
Midwestuary 2025, August 22nd through the 24th in Elmhurst, Illinois. A weekend you won't want to miss with special guests Cale Zeldin, Paul Vanderklay, Rod Dreher, Elizabeth Oldfield, John Vervaeke, and Jonathan Pajot. Midwestuary 2025, the Fellowship of the Spirit. Stay tuned for more details. Visit us at midwestuary.com for ongoing updates.